Today I wanted to talk to you guys about a little bit about language acquisition. I do have a master's in ESL, which goes under the heading of applied linguistics. So I've learned a lot about language acquisition in the last couple of years in my studies. So first I wanted to open it up with a question. I wanted to ask you guys, what is language? So anyone, what is language?
A way to communicate.
True, language is a
Great
way
minds.
to communicate. Absolutely. Anyone
A
else have another
series,
idea?
well, I would say rather than an idea, a definition that it's the actual tools that we use to communicate.
Great, that's a great one. Anyone else have another idea about what language is? No, I feel like it's pretty covered. And Millie says here spoken or written. Um, I would say both. I think they're definitely different, but I also think they're connected and they have a lot of the same usage. I totally agree, though. Language is definitely a way that we communicate about our inner feelings and about our world around us, and it's definitely the tools that we use whenever we're negotiating meaning with others. Can anyone tell me, how do you think language is acquired?
I guess it depends how old you are. Like when you're a kid, it's from your parents and from the environment around you. Yeah, like Gertie said, listening. Millie, observation. Larry, smoke
We're
signal.
talking about first language acquisition then, Pax? Is that what you're asking about?
I'm actually talking about just in general language as a concept. How do we gain a language? And this study or this presentation will be focused more on adult language acquisition than as a child, since we don't work with children here, so it didn't really help us to talk about kids. But I think a couple of good points were brought up: observation, listening. But actually, when you just say listening, you're kind of more focused on the passive learning. Speaking is equally important. And we'll see in the presentation that language is not just about observing and listening. It's really about, like Ruby just said, interaction. It's about negotiating meaning with other people. And so listening and speaking, interacting, passive and active language are equally important in acquisition. So in our introduction, I'll just briefly let you know what we're going to be talking about. I am going to be telling you that language is something that the brain acquires naturally, so it's not anything that should be forced. Language acquisition is part of our evolution as social animals, so it's something that as we evolved over millions of years, it became obvious that it was advantageous for our species to have language as a means of communication. As a natural thing, language acquisition ebbs and flows. So it's not a linear process. You don't just learn one thing and always have it, then the next and the next and the next. And I'll go over in more detail that studies have shown that sometimes you learn something or you acquire part of the language, you forget it, you regress and mess up, and then soon after you have mastered the concept and it becomes something you don't even have to think about. And that's going to be really important when we're talking about how we communicate with our students and how we encourage them. Then I'm going to talk to you about how language is learned. My main thrust here is that language isn't learned, it's acquired. It's something that your brain is naturally set up to grasp. And so students need comprehensible input, which is passive language, so listening. They need to have English around them so that they can see how it works. And they also need opportunities for output, which is active language. So they not only listen, but also they have to speak and use the language so that they are able to really acquire it. And the bottom line is it's really, in my opinion, about the negotiation of meaning. And so meaning that if I have something that I want you to know or understand or be aware of, I have to find a way to convey that to you, whether it's in my first language, a second language, a third language, if it's your language, or if it's someone else's language. And so language is all about negotiation of meaning, whether it be through conversation or through telling of abstract ideas or giving instructions. Language acquisition, like I said, is a natural process that utilizes many different parts of the brain. There's not just one section that is the language area. And there's been studies done that show how brain damage affects your ability to use language. And if you have damage in one part versus another part, you're going to have totally different problems with acquisition and with using language. So since different parts of the brain affect different areas of language ability, we need to make sure that when we're acquiring language that we're using lots of different methods and ways in different parts of the brain. I think, personally, I'm a kinesthetic learner, and so I'm always trying to find physical, tactile ways to communicate with my world around me. Other people are visual learners or auditory learners, and even if you're not a mixed learner, we still have language abilities in many parts of our brain, so we need to use many parts of our brain whenever we are acquiring language. The bottom line is we are gregarious creatures. We are social animals. In our evolution, we've learned to work together so that our species will progress, and so we will communicate. And that's one thing I'm going to say over and over again. Language will happen, and whether you're a good teacher or a terrible teacher, your students are going to learn something about language because they will be in a language-rich environment, and that's really the key to language. The fun thing is, studies have shown that students learn language equally whether the environment is fun or if it's really stressful. Language is something that we naturally learn, and so I say, why not make the environment fun? If they're going to learn either way, why put them through a hard time? And they're more likely to come back to a class if it was enjoyable than if it was really stressful. So I always say, try to make everything as enjoyable and relaxed as possible. So a student may say, English is the hardest language to learn. I've heard a lot of them say that. English, maybe not here, but in my life, English is the hardest language to learn. Is it true? So everyone tell me, is that true?
No, that's not what I've heard. I've heard Chinese.
Well, I mean, I think it's all about what your first language is and what your socio-cultural background is. So if my first language was, for example, Farsi, I would find Arabic easy to pick up, or Urdu. So I guess, yes, as Donatella says, it depends. I don't think we can just say true or false.
If they feel it's the hardest language, it is.
Exactly. Yep.
In fact,
That's
you
a really
are
good
right.
point.
You got it perfect, right on the nose. Language acquisition, how hard or easy it is relevant on the first language or the other languages that they know. In linguistics, we call it the L1, meaning the mother tongue, the native language. Because there are differences between languages and how different the language is will make it more and less difficult. So for a Chinese speaker or an Arabic speaker, English actually is one of the hardest languages to learn because Chinese and Arabic are radically, radically different in both syntax, which is grammar, and lexeme, which are just your vocabulary words. So for an Arabic speaker, English is one of the hardest languages to learn. However, for a speaker of French or Spanish, a Romance language, or German, English is actually very easy to learn because they have a lot of syntactic and lexical similarities. English is a language that's an amalgamation of languages. Actually, most words in English came from another language. There are very few English words that were originally English and are only English. We borrow very heavily from Romance languages like French and in Latin, which is where French comes from, obviously. We also have a lot of Germanic features because English is a Germanic language. We come from the same source language as German. And so languages that are similar to English in either their grammar or their words are going to be easier. And languages that are very different from English, like the Asian languages, Arabic, etc., are actually harder. And so what I say is, because we know this, we need to encourage students and tell them, I know it's difficult, but it will happen. Your brain is made to acquire language. If you keep practicing and keep trying, you're going to learn. And don't feel discouraged. I would tell a student maybe who is an Arabic speaker or a Chinese speaker, don't feel discouraged if it seems like the Spanish speakers or the Italian speakers are learning more quickly. They have less to learn because their language is more similar to English. So tell them it will be a challenge and more of a challenge, but you're still going to learn, and do not get discouraged because you're not learning as quickly as you would like.